So thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar. This is more than a webinar, really, it's a celebration of the 10 years of Forever Costa Rica. And I'm very honored to be celebrating 10 years of Forever Costa Rica with a wonderful group of founders who made Forever Costa Rica a reality. My name is Stenka Piskulich. I'm the Executive Director of Forever Costa Rica. And today we are going to share with you some of the work that we have done over the past 10 years, and also thank the founding partners who made Forever Costa Rica possible through their continuous support and who continue to help the organization thrive and continue to help us have impact in conservation. So thank you for joining us. We have three distinguished panelists with us today. We have Eileen Lee, who's the Chief Program Officer of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, Peter Bryant, who's the Senior Program Officer of the Walton Family Foundation, and Jeffrey Parrish, Jeff, who's the Global Managing Director at the Nature Conservancy. And all three organizations were the founding organizations of Forever Costa Rica, who worked jointly with the government of Costa Rica to help us create this dream, which is now a reality. Before we begin with a short presentation, we'd like to share with you a video that summarizes the past 10 years of our work.
What do 10 years mean for an organization whose first name is Forever and whose last name is Costa Rica? This is only the first step to achieve the perpetuity of our country. And when it comes to steps, this was an extraordinary one. A decade in which we've decided to follow the call of the forest and of the sea to achieve extraordinary conservation objectives with our partners. We've developed and nurtured numerous projects in favor of biodiversity, investing $23 million. To ensure the success of over 450 projects carried out this decade, we managed them closely through 2,000 field visits and nearly 4,000 meetings, forging relationships with 90 grantee organizations and 400 partners from 37 countries. We've helped disperse the seeds that will become the fruits of tomorrow. We managed to exceed our goals, creating diverse, healthy, and strong ecosystems by producing 59 management plans and 170 specific plans, thus strengthening protected areas, benefiting 146 protected areas with 18 tools developed to improve effective management. We changed the map of Costa Rica by promoting the creation of marine management areas, seamounts, Cabo Blanco, Bahia Santa Elena, and Barra del Colorado, thus increasing the country's protected marine territory by more than 11,000 square kilometers, sharing the message of perpetuity for our country with over 4,000 people who have participated in our capacity building events and activities, while impacting more than 400 communities, along with 50 local councils and 400 SINEC officials. We continue to lead the way for the future of our country's biodiversity. This has all been possible because 10 years ago, we heeded the call of the forest and the sea. Forever seas, forever forests, forever life. Forever Costa Rica.
Well, thank you. There's not a lot more that needs to be said after that video, but I would like to share with you just some of the highlights of the work that we have done over the past 10 years and a little bit of the story behind the creation of Forever Costa Rica before I pass it on to the panelists. So this is the story of 10 years of sowing the seeds for the future of conservation. And we like to tell this story in the form of the story of an ecosystem, because we believe that the creation of these project finance for permanence really is creating a whole new ecosystem for a country or for a region. We set out over 12 years ago, before Forever Costa Rica began officially 10 years ago, with a conservation goal. And this conservation goal was to help Costa Rica establish a complete network of terrestrial and marine protected areas, resilient to climate change, and with a stable source of funding, thus helping Costa Rica become one of the first developing countries to meet the protected area goals under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Back then, we had the first goal for the first 5 years. Now, of course, this goal is being adjusted as we move forward into 2030 and the new goals of the Convention of Biological Diversity. At the time, of course, this seemed like a dream, something we hoped would be achievable. And as we set out, we found a group of partners to support us in doing this. The Linden Trust for Conservation, the Government of Costa Rica, the Nature Conservancy, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and the Walton Family Foundation decided to join forces to create this initiative. And as you can see, this is the infinity sign, because what we really wanted to do was help build perpetuity for the work that we're doing here in Costa Rica and for conservation in Costa Rica. We all set out with a goal of raising $50 million, and we're actually able to raise $56 million by the time that we close the deal. Currently, we are now managing $82 million, so we continue to grow. There were many success factors that led to the creation of Forever Costa Rica back then, and that are still important success factors for future PFPs as well. We had very important biodiversity that we had targeted for conservation, a comprehensive financial plan, strong presidential sponsorship, very ambitious targets with nationwide projects that covered all systems in perpetuity. We also were able to fully cost all the project goals before closing and ensure that they were fully funded at closing. And of course, we had a single closing for this deal, which was very important. But most importantly, we had a very strong group of fundraisers who were actually represented by the funders themselves, and who went out and were able to raise these funds and were able to share this dream with many other donors. We also were able to create a private independent endowment, the Forever Costa Rica Trust, as well as another endowment for the Second Debt for Nature Swap funds. And we were able to create a private independent organization, the Forever Costa Rica organization. Then, of course, we also had a very strong commitment from the core donors to fund a strong project team to make this happen. And Forever Costa Rica became a reality exactly 10 years ago in August, with the purpose of becoming a convener, both at a national and international level, to foster collaboration, to generate knowledge, and to promote innovation in natural resource management. We became the first conservation trust fund in Costa Rica. Just like we're saying the story of an ecosystem, the story of Forever Costa Rica starts with the nutrients, the carbon and the nitrogen that provide rich, fertile soil. And that, in our case, was the resources to make this happen. We began, as I said, with $56 million. Since then, we have already invested almost $23 million, not only through the Forever Costa Rica program, but through the growth of the organization by also administering now the First Debt for Nature Swap and a series of complementary initiatives that all support the work that we have done through the Forever Costa Rica program. The projects are the seeds that we have been able to plant in this fertile soil. And we have been able to successfully implement 456 projects over the past 10 years. As you can see, these seeds have been growing, and we have been planting more seeds as the years go on. 2017 has a especially big number of projects because that's when we also started working in the First Debt for Nature Swap. But that's over 456 projects. And what's really important is that we feel that we need to nurture this ground. It's not only planting these seeds, but ensuring that they have the right nutrients. So we've carried out over 1,900 field visits. We've participated in almost 4,000 meetings, and we take part in 456 oversight committees, one for each project. We also feel that the partners are the seed dispersers, just like the tapirs are seed dispersers in the forest. In our case, we've worked with over 87 organizations who have received funding directly, nearly 400 partners, and over 37 countries where we have worked also through creation of alliances. This is, I think, important because part of our work is really understanding how do we measure the impact in life? How do we measure the impact in an ecosystem? And in this time, we have been able to exceed our goals We have been able to reach 118% of our goals, creating a significant number of specific plans in areas such as environmental education, use of natural resources, community participation to help these protected areas thrive. Amongst them, we have helped 146 protected areas, and we have helped and measured the impact in improvement of management effectiveness in 75 protected areas, and have used over 18 technical tools to measure this management effectiveness. Like the photograph or the picture here of the bellbird, we really feel that we need to measure the impact of climate change. And so every day, climate change adaptation is becoming more important in the work that we do. We have done over 10 climate adaptation and mitigation plans at an eco-regional level. So we have pretty much covered most of the country in terms of developing climate change and adaptation mitigation plans, and have already implemented direct measures in over 16 protected areas. Most importantly, like a coral reef, the success of everything depends on a balance. And in this case, it is the balance between nature and the people who are part of nature. So for us, it has been really important to emphasize our work with communities, working with over 376 CNAC officials in 423 communities, and supporting many people in building their capacities. So over 3,820 capacities building activities with people. Most importantly, we have also changed the conservation map of the country, helping to protect over 11,000 square kilometers of marine protected areas. Yesterday we were discussing this, we were saying this is actually bigger than the size of Lebanon. So this is a big impact that we've had. We continue to work and continuously not only creating these protected areas, but also working with the people from these protected areas to ensure a better livelihood. In summary, we are working towards perpetuity. And during the last 10 years, our perseverance has been key in fulfilling our mandate. We have worked with passion. We have really worked in completing what was once just a plan, a 5-year plan. We are now about to begin our third 5-year plan for the next 5 years. And we really do believe this is just the beginning. 10 years is not a long time when we are talking about perpetuity, but it's an important beginning to set the basis, to create, to disperse the seeds, and to ensure that we have a healthy ecosystem. So thank you. I would like to thank everyone who has been a part of this, but especially the founding donors who not only participated hands-on in making this possible, but continue to participate with us, continue to support our work, and hopefully can also share and disperse these seeds throughout other areas and regions in the world. Thank you very much to the Moore Foundation. Thank you very much to the Walton Family Foundation, to the Nature Conservancy, to the Linden Trust for Conservation, and to the government of Costa Rica for making this a reality. Thank you. And now we will get started with some of the presentations that we have. So first, I would like to introduce Eileen Lee. Eileen is the Chief Program Officer of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation's Environmental Conservation Program. She's had previous roles at the foundation, including developing and leading the Wild Salmon Ecosystems Initiative and the Conservation and Market Initiative. I'm going to unmute Eileen. Just a minute. Okay, no, there you go. Okay, and thank you, Eileen. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the role of the Moore Foundation in the creation of Forever Costa Rica, and your recommendations for the future.
Thank you, Zdenka. And I have to start by, of course, first acknowledging and thanking you for your steady leadership over these years, without which all of the achievements of Forever Costa Rica would not have been possible. So I think all of us owe you a great round of thanks. And I'm really delighted to be able to join all of you today for this celebration of the 10th anniversary of Forever Costa Rica. It's really a milestone for a project that has, as we've seen, helped transform a country, and that also really represents, I think, an important gift to nature conservation at a global scale. So just to start, for those of you who don't know the foundation, we were established as a vehicle for the philanthropy of Intel co-founder Gordon Moore and his wife Betty. One of our major programs is focused on global environmental conservation, reflecting Gordon and Betty's passion for preserving the natural world for future generations. And since the foundation was started nearly 20 years ago now, we've invested close to $2 billion in the conservation of globally important intact natural ecosystems as reservoirs for biodiversity and life support systems for humanity. Through our philanthropy, we've had the privilege to be involved with groundbreaking projects in many special places all around the world. And yet, even with that, I would say Forever Costa Rica stands out among the projects that we've had the pleasure of supporting for the sheer scale and ambitious vision of what was accomplished. I think it really stands as a testimony to what's possible when we think big in terms of bringing together public-private partnerships to catalyze solutions for biodiversity, nature, and people. Really thinking back, I think Costa Rica had laid out an audacious vision for conserving its natural resources, setting targets that would double its marine protected areas and permanently secure the legacy of the nation's large network of terrestrial protected areas, putting it on a pioneering path to achieving its targets under the United Nations Convention of Biological Diversity. And while this long-term vision was clear and compelling, I'd say it was also apparent that Costa Rica could not bring that promising vision of the future into fruition, working just in isolation. Bringing this ambitious vision into reality was going to require a tremendous mobilization of financial resources, policy action, governance capacity, and in particular, it was going to require an infusion of private capital that would put Costa Rica's public actors in a position to make the changes and investments necessary for the long term. This public-private partnership really was going to get the flywheel turning towards this more sustainable vision of Costa Rica's future. It was really in this capacity as an investor of philanthropic capital that the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation joined the Forever Costa Rica deal alongside the other partners who are here with us today. I would say we were attracted not only by the promise of the conservation results that Forever Costa Rica aimed to secure, but also by a deal and an opportunity that was really structured to optimize the use of private philanthropic commitments in tandem with and conditioned around parallel policy commitments, governance action, and resource mobilization by the Costa Rican government. We were really excited that our contribution to a private independent trust that would wind up managing over 55 million in external funds, and as we heard from Zdenka, even more than that today, that it was structured in a way that would allow the project and Forever Costa Rica to really achieve, as Zdenka described, that perpetuity, flexibility, stable and independent governance. The sinking fund component of this really was designed to allow for ample support for clearly defined one-time costs, such as the creation of the new protected areas and the purchase of equipment and infrastructure. But at the same time, the endowment fund component was really going to provide a permanent funding stream to support the ongoing management of Costa Rican protected areas, supplementing the commitments that the government would make as part of its own contribution to this ambitious vision. 10 years later, the direct conservation impact of Forever Costa Rica, I think, is clear and inspiring. It integrates marine and terrestrial protection at a large scale and transforms the governance systems that allow these important ecosystems to be managed in a manner that secures the full range of benefits that they're capable of delivering for an unending line of generations to come. And in their own right, these accomplishments would really be enough reason for us to be here celebrating Forever Costa Rica. But I have to say that with the benefit of 10 years of successful execution behind us and the perspective of our foundation that looks globally at conservation challenges and opportunities, I would say that Forever Costa Rica's most important achievement might be something that goes well beyond its own biodiverse forests and productive seas. Costa Rica's path-breaking vision for the large-scale conservation of its natural ecosystems was really rooted in its confident belief that securing the legacy of these natural systems was the same thing as securing a brighter future for the country. They recognized that building Costa Rica's future on a foundation of resilient natural ecosystems would yield dividends that would ultimately more than return their investment. And 10 years on, Forever Costa Rica's worked with protected area communities, managed marine use areas, sustainable tourism, are all really delivering on this promise. This, in my mind, is an important lesson for the rest of the world as we ask ourselves what we can do to scale up our commitments to nature conservation and the benefits it delivers. Interestingly, while study after study consistently tells us that nature conservation pays, it's also pretty clear that for most countries, it's not enough to simply call on them to invest in isolation toward that promise. The underlying business case for investing in nature, those fundamentals are sound. Indeed, we saw a recent report by the Weiss Campaign for Nature that found that the economic benefits of protecting 30% of the planet would outweigh the costs by at least 5 to 1. And in a similar vein, a recent report from the World Economic Forum talked about how a nature-positive approach to economic development would create 400 million jobs and 10 trillion in business opportunity annually over the next 10 years. So I think that case is really clear, but what's missing is that belief that we can get there, right? And to help countries get on this path, we need to show them that it's possible to get the flywheel turning, and that doing so will allow them to realize the benefits of an ambitious nature conservation agenda. Forever Costa Rica is special because it provides a compelling model that demonstrates exactly that. And as Zdenka says, the work has only just started, but I do think that building on this success is going to be an important part of really making this case, and that ultimately Forever Costa Rica's legacy around making this a model for the world may be just as important as its work in its own forests and its oceans. So again, Zdenka, I did want to just say congratulations to you and Forever Costa Rica. The Moore Foundation is really proud to stand with you and the other organizations here today as a partner in this work.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Thank you for your words, and I completely agree. As we were saying, this ecosystem that we have created, the idea is that we can spread these seeds. And I think that if we believe that these seeds can grow elsewhere, they will. And so I completely agree with you. And I thank you again for all of the Moore Foundation support throughout all these 10 years. Also, before we continue, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the Q&A section in our present here so that we can also have some time to discuss amongst all of us. Thank you, Eileen. So next, I would like to invite Peter Bryant. Peter is currently the Senior Program Officer at the Walton Personal Philanthropy Group and the Builders Initiative. And previously, he spent 9 years as manager at the Walton Family Foundation, and was also one of the persons who participated hands-on in making Forever Costa Rica possible. So thank you, Peter, for joining us, and tell us a little bit more about your experience and the Walton Family Foundation's experience with the creation of Forever Costa Rica and some of the challenges that you see ahead for this project and for similar projects.
Yeah, thank you again. And I just want to echo everything that Eileen said. I think this program has been a tremendous success, both for the country of Costa Rica and the government of Costa Rica, but also globally. It really has set a precedent. And like the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation has been honored to be a part of it. I'm going to be a lot less polished than either of you with my remarks. But I want to share a little bit about the way that the Walton Foundation took its decision to engage in this project. And for us, for folks who may not know us, the Walton Family Foundation is a relatively young foundation. We were started in 2005. And so we really only have about 15 years of experience behind us in terms of our environmental program. And that environmental program is both a program oriented around freshwater conservation and ocean conservation. But the only work of the Walton Family Foundation, sort of in terms of our core programs outside of the United States, has been largely the oceans conservation program work. And so when we originally thought about this project, we had already been working for a few years in the Pacific coastal waters of the Eastern Tropical Pacific seascape, covering the area from Ecuador north to Costa Rica. But we saw this as a huge opportunity to really scale up at impact the level of marine protection in Costa Rica, which as a country had done tremendous work on the terrestrial side to set aside its lands for protection, but was falling a little bit short in terms of its own lofty goals on the terrestrial side in terms of marine protection in trying to meet those UN commitments. So I felt very early on that Zdenka and the Forever Costa Rica team had a real strong commitment to dramatically expanding not only the marine protected area coverage through this mechanism, but also really highlighting the importance of the cost to manage in perpetuity protected areas and what that actually looks like in terms of cost and scale. And so for us, it really became a great opportunity to dramatically magnify the level of protection of in the ocean, in Costa Rica's waters, but also to really highlight the importance of that, the need for ongoing protection in perpetuity to sustain these places so that they're not paper parks. And Forever Costa Rica's commitment to project modeling and cost modeling what these areas would need in terms of management, I think was a huge attribute of its success. The other thing I want to say in terms of the Walton Family Foundation's role related to the creation of Forever Costa Rica was, I think we got very actively involved with the other partners, Linden Trust for Conservation, Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, as funders in this to really set transparent governance and structural contributions to this fund that made it easier for us as a US foundation to invest in a long-term project finance for permanence in another country. We had trustees that while they were excited about the opportunities that Forever Costa Rica presented, they were also anxious about would our funds be forever used for the things that we actually want them to be used for. And so we worked closely with the Forever Costa Rica team, in particular through an in-country consultant, Michael Rothschild, who became the first chair of the board of Forever Costa Rica, to look at how do you set up governance structure that will allow for transparent decision-making and that funds will be used for the intended purposes over time. We wanted a strong financial and capacity commitment from the government of Costa Rica to ramp up the level of resources that they were putting into marine protection, which they met. And we were really excited that they were willing to double the funding for marine protected areas in perpetuity as a contribution of their effort. And I think we also really wanted to ensure that while the government had an important role to play, so did civil society, and that the board makeup of Forever Costa Rica really needed to reflect the collective interests of the Costa Rica population. And so we worked closely with Zdenka and the team to find a set of government and independent board members that would help ensure the governance would be strong for Forever Costa Rica. I think in terms of the main achievements of Forever Costa Rica, I would point first to, and this sounds a little bit silly to say, but you guys executed on what you said you would do. That is hugely important. It doesn't always happen without existential crises or other sorts of things. And the track record of what has been accomplished over the last 10 years is tremendous. And to do that without a major existential crisis of sorts is, I think, a testament to the leadership of the board and staff of Forever Costa Rica. And I think it's important to highlight that you did what you said you were going to do, and that's really important. A second big area that is important to me is, I think, this idea of long-term endowments or projects finance for permanence had been done a couple times before around the world, but really Forever Costa Rica became a model for all of Latin America for how you could take this approach to both link commitments to protection with real government commitments to financing and the ability to raise funds so that you could ensure the management of these areas over time. And we've seen other funds emerge over the years since that have tried to emulate what Forever Costa Rica has done in that space. In terms of recommendations and future challenges, I guess one thing that I would say is this isn't a future challenge. It was a challenge that we set out for Forever Costa Rica right at the outset, which was while they raised more money than their original goal, they had a deficit in terms of what they could do for funding the marine protected area component. And that challenge was met head on by Zdenka and her team in trying to be creative about finding new ways to bring additional dollars in after the global community had sort of recognized that they'd exceeded their financial goal. We tied hands behind their backs, so to speak, to say, oh, you've got to go out and raise more money for the marine protected area piece, when most of the global community was saying, no, 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 they exceeded their fundraising goal. And through the creation of Pacifico, through the creation of the Migratory Species Partnership for Marine Migratory Species, I think Forever Costa Rica has done a tremendous job in continuing to be creative about ways to raise money. Having said that, I think a recommendation and a challenge for the future is just this issue of how do you maintain political and donor interest over time, because you're not the exciting thing that's right out of the gate anymore. And as much as funders love to get behind a success, funders also are historically are fickle and can lose interest relatively quickly in things. And so maintaining both the high level of political and funding support, I think, is going to be really important, especially as we think about now the CBD and the UN have set commitments of 30% protection by 2030. And so the task at hand has not stopped, even as Forever Costa Rica has been incredibly successful. And I think continuing to be creative and find ways to engage both the political leadership within Costa Rica and globally, and the funding community is going to be really important. Final thing I'd just say in terms of global biodiversity conservation, I think both Zdenka and Eileen have pointed to a lot of successes. I'd like to point to one specific success in particular, which is, I think, the first ever subsurface seamount protected in the Eastern Tropical Pacific seascape. That is a landmark protection that was put in place as a result of Forever Costa Rica, and it's a tangible sort of outcome that's the type of thing that gets the Walton Family Foundation's Oceans Initiative very, very excited, because we want to see creative ways at bringing protection to things where you actually can't see because everything's underwater, and the team did a fantastic job in securing protection of that seamount system. So I'll stop there, and again, thank Zdenka, thank Eileen and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, Linden Trust for Conservation, and the Nature Conservancy for 10 tremendous years of success, a lot of hard work, but a lot to be appreciative of.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for always being such a champion for the work that we do throughout all these years. Also, I'd just like to point out something that you said, which I think is really important. We were set out and created around the 2015 goal. And now we have to look towards a 30 by 30 goal. When we first set out, we were thinking about 4% of our economic exclusive zone protected. Now we need to think 30%. And so this represents loftier goals, much more difficult to achieve, and we will achieve them. But it will take a lot of persistence. And as you said, it will require a lot of creativity and innovation to continue to find ways to fund this work and to continue to build new alliances and partnerships with non-traditional sectors that maybe conservation trust funds were not working with a few years ago. And that has really brought us to create a whole program on alliances and seeking new ways to work jointly to increase the impact of the work that we do. So I completely agree with your points. So just to remind everyone that if you would like to ask any questions, also if you could specify who you would like to ask that question to, that would be great in the Q&A section. Now we'll move on to Jeff Parrish. Jeff is the Global Managing Director for the Nature Protection at Nature Conservancy. He has large-scale protection experience as well as experience in conservation strategy entrepreneurship. innovative approaches at scale philanthropy, science, and conservation planning expertise. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Adenka. Gusto estar con ustedes. I'm so happy to be with you. And when you told me about this 10-year anniversary, I kind of harkened back to who we think of as the grandfather of the PFP, of Larry Lyndon, and who is a dear friend and a passionate advocate for our planet. And 20 years ago, he looked at many of us in the eye and said, "What is wrong with you conservationists?" And in the financial sector, we would never build half a bridge or go around with hat in hand to try to raise additional money for a major project that we want to endure over time. We would never build half of a skyscraper. We'd have our plans in place. We'd have the commitments in place. We would have the money in place. And he challenged us to think about permanence. And you did that. And I think you and this team took on that challenge. And one thing I'd like to reflect on today is just how you set the model for the future and how you've influenced so many beyond Costa Rica, as well as what you've achieved within the country. One of the things that we've learned over the past decade is that permanence doesn't come just from the plan and the financing. It also comes from people, and people who are committed to these protected areas. And again, thank you to you and your team for being so committed to the people of Costa Rica, to the parks of Costa Rica, but also to this issue of permanence. You have truly influenced the Nature Conservancy. Forever Costa Rica has been one of the most important things that we've ever done as an organization since we began more than 60 years ago. And it reflects our commitment going forward to representative, effective, and enduring and durable protected areas. And that's a history we're doubling down on now. I think there's a period of time where we're perhaps not doing quite as much of that work, and we are inspired by your model and are committed to doing even more of that and trying to expand it going forward. And so we thank you and for that influence. You've really changed one of the world's largest conservation organizations because of your expertise and experience. Our role in this was really trying to imagine what we could do in Costa Rica to expand the protected area system, working with the Lyndon Trust for Conservation, with your team, with Eileen, and with Peter, and to really think about how we could bring some of our donors to the table to help seed this big vision. And this, essentially, what we did was a drop in the bucket compared to what you've done over the past 10 years. But we've been really proud to be able to be there and support along the way, raising money from our own internal funds, as well as from our donors, but also being able to be there to play a role in that important governance structure that Peter spoke about, and to be able to be there and support the organization going forward, because again, that has been key to the permanence, is what you and your team have done. Forever Costa Rica, in my mind, really made the world think about permanence and about durability. And it was literally a sea change, I think, for the way that the conservation movement has approached conservation over the past decade. And we've seen many others pick up the baton around these project finance for permanence deals, almost all of which Eileen and her team have been engaged in. WWF has been championing that, again, building off of the experience and doing these deals in other places around the Amazon basin and Bhutan. And we're excited to be thinking now about how can we expand even beyond Latin America and take this model and all the lessons learned that you've had and take it around the world in partnership with others, including you. It's the achievements, Peter talked about the achievements in Costa Rica, and I won't repeat those. They're extraordinary. And I think they're, and they've been hard, right? It's taken lots of meetings under trees and on a beach. It's taken lots of continued negotiations, and to realize the power of the deal that you created. So I won't repeat those things, all of which are extraordinary, but I do want to come back to this issue of how you've influenced others. PFPs are powerful. but they're incredibly hard, as the three of you will attest to. They're really time consuming, they're cost intensive, and they demand a lot of patience. And we've really only done 5 of them over the past 10, 12 years, right? And what we need to do in the coming decade is to do far more of them. And so I'm looking forward to learning from you and to continue to spread those seeds that you spoke about and disperse those seeds in other places around the world. You've inspired TNC to now look to applying the model in places like Mongolia and Kenya, to think about how can we expand and think about durability and protection, which, as to Peter's point and Eileen's point around, in conservation, we often put our attention on the shiny objects, and thinking about the durability is sometimes the hardest thing. And your experience has made it look easy, and you've really helped us and inspired us to really focus on that endurance and on that permanence. You charted the path forward in the PFP mechanism with virtually no past experiences to build off of, and so you were a true pioneer. You were a pioneering species, and as a result of that tenacity, you learned so much from those challenges and successes. But since then, we are now able to stand on your shoulders and to take those lessons learned. And I think there's a lot of people on the phone right now who have done that, whether it's in another type of trust fund, or whether it's in actually trying to work on project finance for permanence deals. So we're grateful for the legacy that you've left, not only in Costa Rica, in Costa Rica's lands and waters, but also the legacy and the impact you've had on the rest of us in the conservation community, and inspired us to what we can do going forward. You'll have our continued support, and our perpetual admiration for everything that you've done. I'm just really grateful and humbled that we could have been a part of it, and looking forward to seeing what we can all do together going forward. So thank you to your team. Millón de gracias por todo que han hecho. And I just want to say, if I could, I'd give you a huge Jefe hug from here in Colorado.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I receive it, the virtual hug. And thank you for your words. I think something that you mentioned, which really sticks with me, is permanence comes from people. And I think that one of the biggest lessons of the work that we've done through Forever Costa Rica is precisely that at the end, even when you have this very big idea and you need to dream big and you need to think of millions of dollars and how to put them in place, and planning and 5-year plans and management plans and numbers, at the end, it all really boils down to how you're impacting the lives of people, because these are the people who will be giving permanence to the efforts that we're doing. And I think it's been a very important lesson that will be, of course, replicated and integrated into future PFPs. The people component is crucial, just like science component is absolutely vital. Making sure that you can measure impact is absolutely necessary, but also the people component. So thank you for reminding us to focus on that as well. So thank you to the 3 of you for your very kind words, and for all the knowledge you have of the work that we've done, and that hopefully can be replicated elsewhere as well. We have 2 questions so far. If anyone else has other questions, please feel free to add them in your Q&A section. And also let us know who you would like to direct your question to. The first question actually comes from Manuel Ramirez, who is a member of our assembly and worked in Conservation International here in Costa Rica for many years before moving to Earth University and OSA Conservation as well. So Manuel, I'm sure many of you are familiar with him as well. And Manuel asks, I would like to know how the current pandemic has affected or modified or changed our plans to help communities in need, and how it has affected, if any, our current investments for conservation. So maybe that question, maybe I can start and explain how it's happened to Costa Rica, and then if one of you would like to add to that. So in the case of our work, it definitely has a strong impact. In a country like Costa Rica that is so highly dependent on tourism, many of our efforts and strategies have revolved around actually helping these communities think of business plans and long-term financial plans based on tourism as an alternative to promote the marine protected areas where they're based, the coasts where they're based. And now tourism right now is something that is obviously suffering tremendously from this pandemic. So a lot of our work in this sense, or one of the big lessons for us has been, as we look at alternative strategies for economic growth of these communities, we need to think of tourism as an important economic alternative, but not as the only one. And it's something we're incorporating into the work that we do, and also seeking to differentiate the type of service that we can offer in many of these communities. So it's definitely affected the communities. It has affected our protected areas as well. Obviously, there is protected areas are receiving 90% less people now than they were receiving before the pandemic. In a country that depends highly on tourism, that is definitely affecting the protected area income. The protected area income this year has decreased substantially for the new fiscal year that will begin. And so there are definitely challenges and budgetary challenges into making this happen. But when it comes to, I think that it also shows that these projects, when you think in perpetuity, are made to be able to withstand these types of crises and to be able to see beyond what is currently happening and to think, how do I focus my investments for the next 5 years to be able to also address these issues. And so I believe that conservation trust funds and PFPs in general have an important responsibility as organizations that have the capacity to look in the long term to the solutions to this pandemic. Now, I don't know if any of the three of you would like to address this issue, how your organizations are also helping and supporting during the pandemic.
I'll just say that I think to your point, Zdenka, so much of our thinking on sustainable financing for protected areas has been focused on things like tourism. We've been very myopic, and I think in the future, we've seen the impact of that in places like conservancies in Kenya that were benefiting. Their conservation efforts were driven by some of that sustainable livelihood from tourism, and I think this really forces us and all of our conservation projects around the world to think more broadly about how do we sustainably finance our conservation efforts, and to do that because there will be another pandemic or another crisis that will come. And so we need to really make sure that we've started to plan ahead. And I'd say too that, the extent to which we can build those multiple mechanisms into any deal to prepare for other revenue sources, I think is really, really important.
The one thing I would say, I'm not part of the Oceans Initiative with Walton Family Foundation anymore, but I don't speak with firsthand authority, but I think the efforts there have been to relax requirements a fair bit on grantees and to make to allow for funds to be used a little bit more for general operating and crisis management in the wake of funds not being delivered, and then to help those communities in which they operate to the extent that there are good opportunities to do that.
I guess the only thing I would add is I think when you look at the pandemic and how it affects our work, it simultaneously changes everything, right? In the sense that it affects so much the people, the organizations, the communities that are on the front lines. And I think to Peter's point, being flexible and adaptive to what they really need is what you can do. But I think it's also important that in some ways, I would say in some ways it changes nothing, in the sense that what it really tells us is that building from a foundation of ecosystem resilience and intact habitat is so important, right? I think what we're increasingly seeing is that zoonoses, the crises that are associated with climate adaptation, all these things are linked, and they really come back to, are we protecting resilient ecosystems? So I think fundamentally what Forever Costa Rica and our collective work stands for on this, to me it just says this is more important than ever. Right?
Thank you. So here's a question maybe each one of you can answer in a minute. What do you consider to be our biggest risk in terms of perpetuity when putting together these projects? Maybe you can start with Jeff.
I think just going back to the people piece, I think in the early days of PFPs, and as we thought about durability and permanence, we really focused on the single closing in the deal, which is powerful. But if we don't have the alignment of people supporting these parks, if we don't have people standing up for conservation when administrations change over time, I think we're really, we are being extremely naive. And so the more that we can build in people, community development into our deals going forward, the more secure, the more permanent, the more guarantee there is for that permanence into the future. So that would be one thing I'd add.
Peter?
I think, I think one of the challenges, I'm going to use Jeff's allegory that he used around Larry Linden suggesting, like, why would you ever build a skyscraper while you're trying to finance it? And one of the things that makes me nervous is sort of the shifting baselines of the 2015 target was 10%, and now we're looking at a 30% target in order to meet the UN conventions. And so how do we reflect the challenges associated with perpetuity as the mandate or the mission of institutions like Forever Costa Rica are going to continue to grow, and the financial challenges that come associated with that? That's the thing that sort of keeps me awake at night.
And, I certainly agree with what both Jeff and Peter said. Maybe the thing that I'll add is, I think we all know that the specter of climate change hangs over the work we do. That's why, Zdenka, I was especially encouraged to see the work that you all are doing, thinking about this with a climate adaptation lens, right? The reality is, no matter how successful we are from here on in at mitigation, there is enough climate change baked in that we are going to have to be dealing with it, and making sure that we can, on the one hand, really hold clear to the long-term goals that we've set out, but at the same time being flexible and adaptive to accommodate the change that's coming, I think is going to be critical.
Thank you. Okay, another question for any of you who wants to answer is, do you see parallel examples of Forever Costa Rica starting in other countries around the world? And is the impact or example already growing elsewhere? Maybe who wants to answer that? Eileen, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so I think we certainly see this as a strong model. And I think since we finished the project in Forever Costa Rica, we got involved with the Peru's Natural Legacy project in Peru that had similar aspirations really at the protected area systems level in Peru. And we're currently working on Herencia Colombia, which looks at a similar opportunity in Colombia. And my guess is Jeff can probably speak to an even larger portfolio of opportunities, but we certainly see it as a model that has potential for growth.
And you guys and Paulina and Avesita have been key, not only with your financial support, but your technical expertise and rolling forward that experience from one deal to the next. And so it's been really, really vital to see that replication come to fruition. We're definitely thinking about other places around the world. I mentioned from the Nature Conservancy's perspective, Mongolia and Kenya being two places. We're thinking about how do we collaborate with others in much more in an unprecedented way to try to do, again, 20 of these deals if we can over the next decade, because that's what the planet needs. And we just have to figure out how do we pull the stops out? How do we accelerate that work, both from a funding perspective, but also technically, and because they're hard and complicated. And so I think to Andy's question, I think this, and that point of inspiration, there are a lot of places around the world that we're thinking about rolling this out. One of the coolest things I just would add is that we're evolving the model so that we're thinking, for example, on conservancies. We're thinking about indigenous lands and not just public protected area systems. And so they'll take a different approach, but I think that is one of the really exciting things I think of when I look to the future.
Peter, would you like to add something?
I just say, we've gotten involved in trying to help accelerate conversations around a similar model in Chile, which Zdenka, both you and Jeff were involved in. And so, I think similarly see certainly the opportunity for replicating the model. The other thing that gets me really excited is, to Jeff's point about different iterations or different ways of thinking about this, you know, we're starting to see a lot of opportunity with TNC in particular around blue bonds and debt swaps, and the opportunity to sort of finance at scale marine protected area systems that build in management into them through debt forgiveness, which is really exciting.
Thank you. Well, since we're talking about other projects around the globe, we have a question about Africa. So it says, in many countries in Africa, oil and gas development remains a large economic interest for future development. This often prevents governments from committing large protected areas or reducing allowable uses in the ocean and on the land. How best can we address these economic issues? Is the money enough? I think it's a very valid question. I don't know who wants to take a stab at it.
I'm gonna, because it came from a Nature Conservancy person, I'm gonna let Peter or Eileen speak up.
Pop out. I was hoping you were going to answer it. You know, I'll just comment on the point I just made about blue bonds. One of the things that I think is exciting is that the securing of the blue bond and the financing is only the first step in that process, much as getting the funding for Forever Costa Rica was only the first step in that process. And what should follow is a way to develop appropriate uses in the marine space that allow for development in certain places and allow for protection in certain places. And so hopefully all of these models are looking at what is the appropriate usage and trying to have influence beyond just the financing into the implementation of these things.
I would add that, you know, we often talk about this mitigation hierarchy, right? So when this development happens, how do you avoid conversion and destruction? How to put it in places that are least destructive? But I think one of the big challenges going forward and opportunities is the financing potential for aggregated compensation, aggregated offsets. Some of this development is going to happen. How do we seize that and harness that revenue that should be coming into governments, into conservation trust funds, and then reposition that money in places that really do need to either be expanded or need the durable financing for effective management. So, you know, the analysis has been done. I mean, outside of governmental increases in fiscal budgets for conservation, the second largest way to finance conservation in the next decade through 2030 is through this compensation offset mechanism, when we're not really doing it well enough. And so I think that's an important challenge and opportunity.
All right, well, unfortunately, our time is running out, and we have a lot of unanswered questions, which means we might want to have a second webinar and discuss some of these, because there's really interesting questions about conservation startups, green-blue startups, which are some of the new alliances that we're trying to form as well. But we're going to have to stop here. I was looking through the list of people who are in this call now, and there are people from our board, from our staff. There are donors, individual donors who have supported our work, members and representatives of other foundations, members of the Conservation Finance Alliance community, local and international NGOs, our members and partners from REDLAC, conservation trust funds who have joined us, executive directors from conservation trust funds, allies and partners who are the seed dispersers doing the work here in Costa Rica and elsewhere for us, government representatives and friends. And I was just thinking about how to close this, and what comes to me to mind is the word community. And I think that we have been able to create a community through Forever Costa Rica of like-minded people, of like-minded organizations, and what keeps us all together and what binds us is our capacity to think in the long term, to dream about big things and to be able to achieve them, to put foundations under these dreams. And I think it also speaks to our capacity to convene and to understand that we will never achieve conservation unless we bring and convene as many different parties to the table as we can. And I think that has been really important for our success. And being able to convene all of you to continue to work with us has been crucial in our success. And I'd like to thank each one of you and the organizations you represent and the people from your organization who worked with us and continue to work with us for all the support you have given us throughout these years. Like we say in Costa Rica, gracias, pura vida, muchas gracias for everything you have done for conservation in perpetuity for Costa Rica. Let us hope that this is only the beginning of the story and that we will be meeting again in 10 years and 10 years after that to continue to celebrate our success. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Jeff, for joining us for this short celebration. Thank you.
Felicidades.
Gracias. Goodbye.